Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel for another video in my history series, and Happy New Year! Let's hope that 2021 is miles better than 2020 and we can get back to a normal life sooner rather than later. Today I have a wonderful video to kick off your new year with. That time back in 1854 that London stunk so bad that people literally threw up and the city came to somewhat of a standstill. But this set the groundwork for the modern London that we know and love today. London has such a long and rich history and it's one of my favourite cities in the world. I feel lucky every single day that I can be in central London within half an hour of leaving my house, and the novelty of that will never get old. I feel like a huge reason of why I feel so drawn to the city is the history that you can find around every single corner. There's so much to learn about all the time. In a wonderful accident, both this and the next history video are set in London and they're very much interlinked, so perhaps you consider this video as part one in a two-part series. They definitely complement one another nicely. Of course, this video is sponsored by Magellan TV, who I have a long-standing sponsorship with. They're a streaming service dedicated purely to documentaries, and each month I like to make a recommendation of a couple of documentaries that I think you should watch, starting this time with Marketing the Messiah. This documentary is so interesting. It takes a look at the roots of Christianity and how the religion has been sort of moulded over the years to suit Western civilization. It looks into what the true history is as found in the Bible and what has just become accepted tradition. I'm not religious at all, so I really hesitated to watch this, but actually it's very light-hearted without attacking or making fun of Christianity at all. It's just very honest in its attempt to piece together the story of the religion. I thought it was super interesting and just a different angle about Christianity that you don't see very often. I recommend it for atheists and Christians alike. And then there's a second documentary entitled Clean Hands, about a man, a professor, who's dedicated his life to educating people around the world about how cleaning your hands can cut deaths by infections in half. This is such a simple thing taken for granted by so many, but hand hygiene and healthcare hasn't always been as vitally important as it is now, especially in pandemic times, and this was just super interesting to watch. It really goes to show how cleaning your hands can make such a huge difference. Magellan TV have everything from true crime, science, history, nature and everything in between, with new programmes added weekly that can be watched anywhere on your TV, laptop and mobile. It's compatible with Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Google Play and iOS, and loads of the programmes are available in 4K. If you enjoy my channel, then honestly I cannot stress enough how much you'll enjoy Magellan TV. There's never been a better time to dedicate your time to educating yourself and learning something new. And their gift card offer that I mentioned last month for a buy one get one free annual gift card still stands. So if you know of somebody who would appreciate the gift of documentaries, then that's definitely worth taking a look at. It was really hard to figure out where this story should begin about this great stink, because really it was a problem hundreds of years in the making. London as a city is approximately 2,000 years old, founded by the Romans. That's at least 2,000 years in which people have lived on the banks of the River Thames, which runs through the heart of the city. Of course, throughout history, cities and towns have historically been built on rivers, the quickest mode of transportation of both people and goods. Rivers were also fantastic places to dispose of your waste and sewage in a time before the bin men would come around once a week and we had plumbing available in all of our houses. I mean, remember that up until Tudorish times, most people didn't even have toilets of the indoor or outdoor variety. Most people would just do their business in a chamber pot and throw their waste out onto the street. This waste would then wash away down the street to the local river, and then it wasn't people's problem anymore. Eventually, people began to understand that filth equaled disease, and around the Tudor times, public toilets were installed in major cities, and wealthier people even got their own toilets built. Of course, there was no plumbing though, so the waste just went to these huge cesspits that after a while would need to be emptied, which was the job of gong farmers, gong being slang for poop. It was a well-paid job, but not one people necessarily wanted to do. Around this time, the night soil, as the sewage would be called, would be put on carts and taken out of the city and taken to a dumping site in the countryside. But still, if you weren't wealthy enough to have your own toilet, your own cesspit, and you couldn't be bothered to go to a public one, you were still dumping your waste in the streets, joining all the other waste in the river. Oh yes, we're going to be talking about human waste a lot in this video and the next one as well. You're welcome. But it wasn't just human waste and sewage. You've got something that you don't know what to do with, throw it in the river. We're talking dead animals, horse manure, decomposing food, industrial waste, leftovers from the abattoir, even human bodies, murder victims, human waste of all descriptions. People in history didn't necessarily think of the consequences of throwing their waste in the river for a very long time, and even when they eventually realised that maybe polluting the city's main water source wasn't the brightest of ideas, it was always somebody else's problem to deal with, not the individual person's. Even when plumbing eventually became more of a thing and flush toilets began to exist, the waste of London still headed straight to the Thames through the sewers that had originally only been designed to take rainwater into the river. With the Industrial Revolution in full swing in the early 19th century, people flocked to work in the big cities. More work being available meant more people, and these people having a bit more money than they usually would have done before. All in all, the Industrial Revolution led to an unprecedented rise in the rate of population growth. It's reported that between 1800 and 1850, the population of London more than doubled, and therefore so did the installation of flushable toilets. Double the amount of waste headed straight to the Thames. Year on year, it just got worse, and nobody really wanted to take responsibility for it. The authorities would later claim that nobody warned them what was going to happen. But then again, isn't it their job to kind of preempt this kind of thing? The problem wouldn't really hit its peak until 1858, by which point the Thames was considered to be the most contaminated and polluted river in the world. It was disgusting. It was described in the Thames in 1855 as an opaque pale brown fluid, a fermenting sewer, by scientist Michael Faraday. It was described as being covered in dense clouds of fecal matter. Faraday one day did a test where he would drop pieces of white paper into the river to see how long he could see them before they sank. He reported that this paper disappeared from view before sinking an inch below the surface. He wrote, "Near the bridges, the feculence rolled up in clouds so dense that they were visible at the surface, even in water of this kind." Nowadays you have the Thames Embankment to stop the river from overflowing onto the streets, but back then the river just flowed freely through the heart of the city. This glorified sewer just running through the streets. The Thames still has a reputation of being a very polluted river. In just 1957, the Natural History Museum declared that the Thames was biologically dead. The water levels were so low that it could no longer support life. But then treatment plants were erected, people became more aware of the environment, and new and tighter regulations were brought in. Now, depending on who you want to believe, apparently the Thames is one of the cleanest rivers in the world running through a major city. Which is hard to believe if you've ever actually seen the Thames, but there you go. Nowadays, you can stand next to the Thames, you can take a deep breath in and not worry about choking or dying, which wasn't possible in the mid-1800s. Doing so may actually have killed you, with the amount of sewage just floating on the surface. Of course, we're talking a few decades before the general public would really have a grasp on germ theory, but people did think the disease was caused by miasma, the theory that bad air, bad smells and filth could cause illness. They had the basic idea, and even the general public were beginning to realise that something was wrong with the Thames. A few scientists had begun to put two and two together years beforehand, including a John Snow, who published a paper in 1849 entitled "On the Mode of Communication of Cholera," putting forward his theory that the water supply was causing never-ending cholera epidemics in London, which killed thousands and thousands in the city. Nobody really paid attention to him, but that's a video for another time. Hint, that's part 2 of this video. And 2 whole decades earlier, in 1828, a landscapist called John Martin detailed plans to resolve the Thames's pollution problem. He was a very good artist and had a growing interest in the field of science and technology. He drew up these elaborate plans to create a 3-level embankment on the Thames, extending for 4 miles on the left bank and just less on the right. These levels were to be held up by columns and would allow space for the boats to still moor alongside the embankment, where hoists and cranes would help with the unloading and bringing the goods to street level. In his plans, there would also be public walkways running parallel to the river, and underneath all of this would be 6-metre wide sewers to carry the waste and stop it from polluting. The sewage, according to his plans, would be filtered and cleaned, also with technology designed by himself. This would have solved a lot of London's problems and would have still been nice to look at and walk along, but of course nobody really paid that much attention and his plans were to be ignored, never to be realised. Cholera arrived in London in full force just a few years later, which as we now know was caused by the polluted water supply. Imagine if people had paid attention to John Martin back then, and imagine if this embankment had been built. Maybe the cholera epidemics never would have happened, maybe all these people never would have died, and maybe I wouldn't be standing here today or sitting here today. But of course nobody did pay attention, and then hit the summer of 1858, which came along with a hell of a heat wave. This heat caused the sewage to somewhat boil in the river, to ferment, bringing with it swarms and swarms of flies buzzing all over the surface of the water and over the streets. Standing close to the river would choke you, it would make you retch. This was nicknamed the Great Stink. There's a lot of accounts of Londoners saying they just avoided the river at all costs, just being near it would be enough to make you throw up. You would have to wear masks or cover your face with cloths treated with herbs and oils if you were to go outside. Unsurprisingly, it was only at this point that the people in authority really began to care, because the new Houses of Parliament had only recently been completed at Westminster, and the politicians couldn't focus on their debates due to the horrific smell. The Times reported at the time, the intense heat had driven our legislators from those portions of their building which overlooked the river. A few members, indeed, bent upon investigating the matter to its very depth, ventured into the library, but they were instantaneously driven to retreat, each man with a handkerchief to his nose. They attempted to deal with the problem by dousing the curtains of Parliament in chloride of lime, which was said to be great for disease prevention. Remember, people believed in miasma, they could get sick from the stench of the Thames, so this whole Great Stink had an extra layer of terror to it, people believing that just smelling it would make them ill. Chloride of lime was marketed as preventing infection, purifying the air, to use on scalds and sores, and to be put on gone-off meat. Whereas really it was nothing more than a glorified air freshener and actually did nothing to help mask the smell. The smell was just too potent. Of course, now it was affecting them directly, the MPs decided to actually do something to fix the Thames. After years and years of ignoring scientists' warnings, only now did they decide to help. A bill was drawn up by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Benjamin Disraeli, which was then passed and signed into law in a record time of 18 days. Disraeli told MPs, "That noble river, so long the pride and joy of Englishmen, which has hitherto been associated with the noblest feats of our commerce and the most beautiful passages of our poetry, has really become a Stygian pool, reeking with ineffable and intolerable horrors. The public health is at stake. Almost all living things that existed in the waters of the Thames have disappeared or been destroyed. A very natural fear has arisen that living beings upon its banks may share the same fate. There is a pervading apprehension of pestilence in this great city." The bill was passed into law on the 2nd of August 1958. The Metropolitan Board of Works were given the authority to rethink the entire sewage system of London. Parliament approved an expenditure of £2.5 million, about 300 million today, for the scheme. They were not short of money. An engineer called Joseph Bazalgette was put in charge of the project, which would change the face of London forever. The London we know today is largely in part to what Bazalgette put into action. He'd already been working on a system behind the scenes for a number of years. Having begun his career as a railway engineer, he had a lot of experience in land drainage and reclamation. He had drawn up plans for a new sanitation system involving a network of main sewers that ran parallel to the river, intercepting both surface water and waste before it would reach the Thames. It would then reroute the sewage to elaborate plumbing stations at the outer edges of the city. From there, the sewage would still be pumped out into the river, but in less populated areas. It was kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing. But also, emptying the sewage here would mean it would be taken into the ocean faster and away from the city. This new sewage system remained in place until the 20th century, when people began to realise that pumping raw sewage into the environment probably wasn't a good idea. Dumping sewage in the sea was actually only banned by a European Union directive in 1998, which actually is incredibly recently. But the system is still thought to be a stroke of genius for the time. Bazalgette succeeded in getting all of the sewage out of central London, and Thames Water still say that the pipes are still in perfect working order today. They're just not quite designed for a city of almost 9 million. And the new sewage system wasn't the only thing put in place as part of this plan. The Thames Embankment are also thanks to this. The embankment reclaimed the marshy land next to the river, and the work began in 1862. The concept was designed by Joseph Bazalgette, but the architectural work was actually done by Charles Henry Driver. The embankment reclaimed 22 acres of land from the river, and below the surface of the embankment was the main low-level interceptor sewer and part of the Underground Railway. On the surface was a wide road and riverside walkway, the very same walkway that you've probably walked down if you've ever visited London. Not only would the embankment provide a nice place for people to walk when they couldn't even approach the river a decade before, it also prevented flooding and helped further cleanse the river by narrowing it and therefore strengthening its flow. 265 kilometres of old sewers were replaced with 1,700 kilometres of new ones. Of course though, this new embankment wasn't a popular move with everyone. In order for it to be built, they had to demolish whole stretches of the waterfront in some places, and many houses, warehouses and businesses with river frontages also lost their boat access to the Thames. This resulted in many people losing their livelihoods. Although I can imagine that when the Thames was at its worst, they probably wanted to do something to fix the Thames themselves. They probably didn't enjoy being on the riverfront that much. But so many people were misplaced by the entire thing, many people lost their livelihoods. But on the other hand, it did provide a lot of jobs for local people. 318 million bricks were laid in the building of the new system, and the wages of bricklayers increased by about 20% as a result, and so many people were employed because of it. Bazalgette's system was amazing for the time. It was this incredible feat of engineering that even stood the test of time when London's population grew exponentially. It doubled over 30 years. But as London continues to grow with a projected population of 10 million by 2030 apparently, the systems are struggling to cope once again. It's strained. In his plans, Bazalgette did plan for extreme weather with overflows into the Thames to stop homes and streets getting flooded with sewage. They were there for states of emergency, but now they're being used more than ever. According to The Guardian, the overflows are dumping raw sewage into the Thames around 50 times a year currently. So in 2016, they started on the construction of the Thames Tideway Tunnel, or the Super Sewer, using Bazalgette's designs as inspiration. In fact, the infrastructure provider who is covering the whole thing is called Bazalgette Tunnel Limited. This super sewer is to be a 25-kilometre tunnel running under the tidal section of the River Thames to capture, store and convey all of the raw sewage and rainwater that's currently overflowing. It was aimed to be completed by 2024, but due to the pandemic, it's been delayed to 2025. Knowing London, it'll probably be later than this. So there you go, that's the story of how the Great Stink of London in 1858 caused a complete regeneration of London's sewage system. Hundreds of years of raw sewage being thrown straight into the city's main water source, and nobody ever really thought anything of doing such a thing. It makes me wonder, what things do we do today without second thought that will have major repercussions for generations down the line? Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video doesn't put you off your food too much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.